Hi, and welcome back to the second segment of Plane Time. I'm Ron Timmermans, one of the hosts with the Florida Aviation Network. I'm glad you've joined us again, and we're about to go into our second segment today. Our guest today is Adrian Eichhorn, a pilot, a mechanic, and an adventurer, and a good friend, and we're discussing what you and I need to know as pilots and owners of aircraft relative to maintenance. And so Adrian's already shared a lot of good information with us, tips and techniques that we can use, more to follow. So Adrian, let's pretend that I'm brand new to here in Orlando and I'm looking for a shop to do maintenance on my aircraft. And an annual is coming up. So what do I need to know about an annual inspection, and what should I discuss with the shop as I'm trying to find the best shop to work on my airplane?
Okay, Ron, I think that's an excellent question. Again, it's a question that's asked because generally, as general aviation pilots, we're never taught anything about how to do this. So what I'd like to do is start off with what an annual inspection really is. And the important thing here is to know that an annual inspection is just that. It is an inspection. An annual inspection is not about repairs. It's not about preventive maintenance. It's not about servicing the aircraft. The inspection is exactly that. It's an inspection. And I think a lot of people have no understanding about that. So that leads me into the topic of how you should, to answer your question, deal with the shop, especially if it's a shop that you've never used before, because a lot of people obviously have used the same shop for years and they're comfortable with their relationship. But going into an unknown shop and not really knowing how they operate and how you're going to be treated and charged in the end for a bill, I think it's a good idea to know what we're going to talk about. So
Adrian, if I get an estimate for an annual inspection of my aircraft and it's $1,500 or $2,500 or $3,000, that doesn't include repairs that they're going to have to make?
No, the repairs will come later.
So it's just the cost of the inspection. So annual inspection, as you said, means inspection.
Right.
Not repairs, because they would be extra. Not preventive maintenance, because that would be additional things. So I need to have that firmly counts in my mind. That
not only do you need to know that, you and the shop owner need to be on the same sheet of music when it comes to, if you decide that that is the proper shop to use when it comes to the decision to have them do the annual, and we'll cover that in a minute. And what has always puzzled me is that, unlike in the automotive world or in the RV world, let's just use the example. I take my car to Jiffy Lube for an oil change. Generally, Jiffy Lube will do an inspection. They'll make sure that your taillights work, your turn signals work, your brake pads are good. In the automotive world, and most of these shops are regulated by state laws, there's no federal laws that I know. Before they do any work to your airplane or to your car, they are required to notify you, tell you what's wrong, give you an estimate on what it's going to cost to repair, and get your signature before they do the work. They can't just start replacing brake pads or turn signal bulbs without your permission, written permission first. That's how it works in the automotive world. Some states are different from others, because my understanding is each state writes their own rules for shops like that. In the aviation world, that is not the case.
Not the case.
At all. And so before you decide for the shop whether you want them to do their maintenance or not, I think it's very important that you take off your pilot hat. You put on your director of maintenance hat, because now at this point, you are not a pilot, Ron. You are a director of maintenance. You call the shots. The shop does not call the shots. And this is what most pilots fail to do because they've never been taught this. For example, the way you should approach the shop, ask them some generic questions. Okay, I'd like you to do the annual. What's the cost? Let's just arbitrary number. It's $2,000 for the annual inspection. It's probably wise to ask some questions. Does that include repacking the wheel bearings? Because the wheels are off at that time. Sometimes shops will do that because the airplane's apart. Does that include cleaning the spark plug? Does that include complying with the airworthiness directives that are required? What does that include, or is it just the inspection cost? So if you agree that you want the shop to work, this is what's critical, and I hope this is the takeaway from this whole presentation. You then tell the shop, okay, I'd like you to do the annual inspection. And when the inspection is done, you want a list of discrepancies, a cost to take care of these discrepancies, and a time. And you are not authorized to perform any maintenance until I have that list. Where things go wrong is mechanics or shops will call an owner and say, hey, we inspected the engine compartment, you've got 4 bad cylinders, I'd like to order the cylinders now. The rest of the inspection's not done. Inspect, repair, and go is a bad situation. You should always wait until the inspection is completely finished before you proceed with any repairs.
Because you may have some options.
You may have some options, which we're going to cover in a minute. So the FAA got this right. The owner's responsible. You're the one that's calling the shop. That shop is working for you. You're paying good hard-earned dollars for that shop to do your maintenance. You're the one that should be telling the shop what to do. The shop should not be telling you how it's going to go. So I think ordering parts before the inspection is complete is bad. Doing any repairs or any service before the inspection is complete is a mistake, and it's done all the time.
Here's one interesting example you shared with me yesterday. So let's say the example you used, the shop calls midway through the inspection and say, hey, we got 4 cylinders that were low in compression. And we'd like to order them now because it's quite a long lead time in the cylinders. So if we order them now, we can probably get your whole inspection done within 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something like that. But if we have to wait, then it's going to be 3 weeks after that before we can get the cylinders. So you're kind of motivated to give them approval to do that, to get those 4 cylinders. But then as you go through it and you think about it as the owner, got to put in 4 new cylinders. Maybe I should just top the whole engine. Or maybe this engine's at 1,500 hours. Okay, I'm going to bite the bullet and go with a new engine. Now what have you done? You got cylinders in order and you make a decision to get a new engine. It's best, as you say, wait till the inspection is completely done, then reflect on it. What makes sense for me as the owner? What makes financial sense? What makes good mechanical sense? Make the decision then. And it's going to maybe take a little bit longer to do it, but it's a better way of making your decisions. And you as the owner are in charge calling the shots, not the mechanic telling you what he or she thinks you should do on an iterative basis. I like that approach.
Exactly, Ron. In an ideal world, you would tell the shop would complete the inspection for the engine, for the airframe, for the propeller and its components. They would provide you a discrepancy list, and then you go over the discrepancy list. And obviously, airworthiness items have to be repaired for that airplane to be signed off and returned to airworthiness status. But more often than not, you'll get a whole list or a number of items that can be deferred. Now, I'm not advocating deferring maintenance. I'm advocating that the owner should call the shop and tell the shop, based on his budget and his time, which of the deferred items he'd like done during that annual inspection. And for an airplane to go through an annual inspection and for you to have a disagreement with the shop, let's just use that example about a cylinder. Say the shop does the compression test and the compression is 60, which is fine in a Continental engine, but it's not fine by that shop standard, and he wants you to replace that cylinder. You, because you're a knowledgeable owner, don't want to replace that cylinder. The inspection is done. When the inspection is done, if the aircraft is signed off as unairworthy, that's not the end of the world, and it's not that uncommon. The mechanic who performed the annual inspection will say something to the effect, I certify that I've inspected this aircraft and found it to be unairworthy. Unairworthy, and he will give you a list of discrepancies.
Does that go in my logbook, that list of discrepancies?
It does not. The sign-off goes in your logbook. The shop provides you the list of discrepancies. You are the custodian of that list. So now you as the aircraft owner, if you had a disagreement with that shop, you have an unairworthy airplane, and the annual is complete, but that cylinder needs to be taken care of. You can contact another shop and have them do it, or have another mechanic come in and give a second opinion. say a shop said that cylinder needs to replace because the compression is less than 60, you get a hold of me, and it's a Continental engine. I'm familiar with Continental SB303, which we'll cover later. It's a service bulletin that specifically talks to compressions. I wouldn't have a problem with it all. I would sign off that discrepancy, and at that point, your airplane is in airworthy condition.
Now that doesn't mean you're an easygoing mechanic. That just means you have an alternate way of looking at a cylinder to determine if it's airworthy or not.
That's legal.
Yeah, and compression testing, although that has some benefits, it's not the only way to determine the legitimacy of a cylinder.
That's exactly
looking at
right.
the valves, checking it for blow by, or compression loss through the muffler or through the intake intake filter and the like. So you got a lot of ways of checking a compression, checking a cylinder for airworthiness, not just the compression check. So if you get into an argument with your mechanic, that is not the end of the world. You said there might be alternate ways of looking to determine if it really is bad and needs to be replaced, or if there's an alternate way of looking at it. Good. But you, the owner, should have the options, not just take the word only.
Not should. You do have
You
the options.
do have the option. Very
Right.
good. Good
Yeah,
point.
and if you manage it properly from the start, when you instruct the shop or the mechanic, give me this list of discrepancies, you're not authorized to do any repairs or order any parts until the complete inspection is done. Then you go over the list and you agree to what should be done. And most of the time, it has a happy understanding as long as the two of you are on the same sheet of music. The worst thing that can happen is an owner goes to a shop, says, here's my keys, I'd like the annual inspection done, call me when it's finished.
Whoa.
Then those repairs are being based on that mechanic's perceived liability of what's airworthy. Because remember, airworthy is a pretty vague, pretty broad definition.
Yeah, as you covered earlier, indeed. So there is a point where you actually tell the mechanic to stop, right? Where you actually tell the mechanic to stop while you, as the owner, evaluate what do I want to do from this list and the like, and have discussions with your mechanic.
Yep. But again, in an ideal situation, you would be provided the list with the cost to repair and the time to complete it as well, because there may be some long lead time on parts. And then the two of you go over it and you agree. And again, I'm not a fan of deferring maintenance. It's your call. And not all maintenance needs to be done on any airplane. You can find discrepancies that can be deferred, and it does not affect the safety of the airplane, but it should be done at your call because you're responsibility for it. So now you are managing that annual inspection because you've been trained how to do it.
Yeah.
We generally don't do that because we don't know about maintenance. And we're a little bit intimidated by mechanics because they're the expert. And that is the purpose of an annual inspection, is to have an expert look at your airplane and make that determination.
But during that process, who owns the process? The mechanic or me as the owner?
You, the owner.
Okay.
Yep.
I need to remember that.
Yep. So again, when that inspection is done, ideally you would get the list. The two of you would agree on what needs to be done. And if there's discrepancies, have them sign it off as unairworthy, provide you the discrepancy list, you're the custodian, and then you have options. If there's no other maintenance facilities on that field, you may have to get a ferry pit permit, which would be difficult to fly at somebody else if you can't bring a mechanic to that field. And an important note too is, let's just say your annual inspection was done today, and there's 5 items that you and the shop did not agree upon. So now you're the custodian of the list. You have that list. Again, it's not in the logbook. The unairworthy sign-off is, but it's your responsibility to maintain that list. You go, you get second opinion. Say you found 3 different shops that you want to address those 5 discrepancies. That may take a while. Let's say that takes 2 months. Well, the next annual does not start from the end of when those repairs were made. It ends from the date that the airplane was determined to be unairworthy. So you're eating up time towards your next annual inspection.
As I'm getting these deficiencies signed off.
Correct.
So okay. So if it takes me 2 or 3 months to get those signed off, I only have 9 or 10 months left until my next annual.
Right.
Yeah, that's good to know. But somewhere in there, I write the big check at the end of the inspection and whatever repairs I need to do. Huh?
So again, in these slides will basically cover what we just said if you want to read through them. Again, you discuss with the shop, you give them guidance on how you want it to, whether it's in writing or verbally. It's obviously better to do it in writing so there's no misunderstanding. And these are some comments that I like people to just read. If you have an IA that acts like this is now his airplane, this is what you have to do, and he acts like he owns the airplane, that's a deal breaker. The fix and inspect, deal breaker. Does he perform repairs without providing you estimates and obtaining your authorization? Deal breaker. That's when it's time to stop. Mm-hmm. Again, the FAA holds you, the airplane owner, responsible. It's not the mechanic. In one other note on an annual inspection, that airplane is airworthy on that day. It could the very next day have a discrepancy that would determine it unairworthy, but it is signed off and it is airworthy on that day.
So it's not a guarantee for the next 12 months?
No, unfortunately it's not.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
That makes
and
sense.
Again, the inspection checklist. One thing about the inspection checklist, this is rather interesting that I never realized, is FAR Part 43, Appendix D, tells the mechanic and the owner what is required on an annual inspection. That's one end of the spectrum, and that's a very minimal, very vague list. Some aircraft manufacturers, like Beechcraft, produce a checklist for an annual 100-hour inspection. That checklist actually has a part number and can be ordered from Beechcraft, and it's about 59 pages long, and it's very thorough. Or if you have a particular airplane that's had some modifications, or it's an older airplane, it's rare, you can develop a checklist that you want the mechanic to follow for the annual inspection. So you could write down, this is how I want you to perform the annual, as long as it meets the minimum requirements of Part D in Appendix 43.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. So I am in charge.
You are totally in
That's
charge,
good.
Ron. Just real quickly here, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. We've covered that.
All right, we're going through some of the slides here, make sure Adrian's got all of his points that he wants to make to him. And so, okay, so we got all the way through the entries. So again, just to reiterate, after an annual inspection, you might get an entry from the mechanic that says, I'm returning this aircraft to airworthy, find it airworthy and returning it to operation. Or if you haven't been able to agree with the mechanic what needs to be done and the mechanic says this needs to be fixed, it's a discrepancy, they can sign off in your logbook, this is an unairworthy airplane, and I've given the owner a list of discrepancies. Now, as the owner, I'm responsible for somehow getting those list of discrepancies fixed, maybe with another mechanic.
Correct.
Complied with, exactly. And when those are signed off, now my airplane is once again airworthy.
Yes, sir.
Back from when they finished the first unairworthy inspection, a month or 2 months ago, or however long it is. Okay, so at least I got a better understanding of what my responsibilities, what my allowances are here. This is good to know. This is good to know. So I'm not sure where we're headed next, Adrian. We're still talking about annual inspections? Or
No, we're talking about, is your engine healthy?
Oh, good, because I was wondering about that. So during the course of an annual inspection, perhaps the mechanic will find something wrong with cylinders or something wrong with the engine and find it unhealthy. But you've got a lot of experience on that, looking at valves and all parts of the engine. I'm just awed by the amount of experience that you've had, not only in your airplane, but you do how many annual inspections a year?
More than probably I should.
More than you should, yeah, 5 or 10, 10 or 12, something like that. So he's got a lot of, you don't have much downtime when you're not flying airplanes, you're in the hangar working on mechanic stuff. So tell us a little bit about how to determine if your engine is healthy or not.
Okay. Before I cover that, I'd just like to tell a quick story that when I bought my airplane back in 1990, I live in Virginia. I used to fly home, pick up my dad, and we would go to Oshkosh together every year, and we did that for years. And at that time, I wasn't an A&P, I wasn't an IA, I knew very little about maintenance and whether or not my engine really was healthy. It was signed off on an annual, so I assumed that it was and everything was going to be fine. But in doing so, when Dad and I would go to Oshkosh to cross Lake Michigan, which is 65 miles of fresh water, we would climb to, say, 12,000, 14,000 feet because we were nervous about flying over water. Well, here we are 30 years later, and countless hours and help and experience on determining whether that engine really is healthy. I don't even think about that now. And same way with flying at night. And one of my trips flying from Honolulu back to Oakland was 17 hours over the Pacific Ocean. Yeah. So that never really fazed me. Never really thought this engine can quit, because I did these tests prior to making the round the world trip. And we'll cover some of those, because I'd say the one test that's near and dear to all of our heart, because it normally will result in a big cost on an annual inspection, is did it pass the compression test? So we've all heard about a compression test. We know a little bit about that. So I'm going to tell a little bit more about the truth of the compression test. So here are really the first 5 of what I like to refer to as 6 tests that I will do when I look at an airplane. A compression test, a borescope inspection. If I was king for a day, if I were running the FAA, I would not make a compression test mandatory. Compression test is mandatory. It was written into the FARs back in the 50s, because at the time that was the only way to assess the true condition of a cylinder. Now we have borescopes inspections, which are much more valuable. We can do oil samples. We can do oil filter samples. We can send it to labs to get it analyzed to determine what the metals are either in the oil or the filter. You can do a visual inspection of the crankcase for cracks, and if there is a crack, you can do a dye penetrant test to determine whether it really is a crack. And now with our digital engine monitors, you can get a lot of information off the engine monitor, whether that cylinder is starting to fail or something that's going on. And another shout out to Mike Bush, who runs Savvy Aviation. They have a program where you can send your engine monitor data to them, and they will monitor it for you and tell you if you have a pending problem. It's a great service that he's done a lot for it. So let's talk real briefly about a compression test, because this is required on an annual inspection. It's not optimal. If you've never done one, here are some references for that, for both Continental and Lycomings. And I work primarily on Continental engines, not Lycomings, but it's the same. We've all heard the number 60. The compression is below 60. We need to make a decision. That's an old number that, in my opinion, there's very little validity to that number being valid for whether that cylinder is good or not. When you do a compression test, and here's why I feel that way. You bring the cylinder to top dead center. You're making the air inside the chamber as small as possible. You pump in 80 pounds of pressure. You open a valve and you read how much of that 80 pounds that cylinder is retaining. Air can leak past piston rings when the cylinders wear out, the rings wear out. They can pass by the valve if the valve is not seated. It could be a perfectly healthy engine. In that compression test, that cylinder should never, ever be replaced just based on a compression test. A borescope, by example, test is the gold standard. And a borescope inspection is simple. You take out a spark plug, you put in a camera, and you can look at the valves and make the assessment of how the cylinder, the condition really is. So we're going to fast forward here because I'd like to get to the pictures. When I first started doing borescope inspections, I had no idea what I was looking at. A borescope inspection is not required by the FARs, but it is a great thing to do. If your shop doesn't do it, or if your mechanic can't do a borescope inspection, I would recommend that you find somebody that can. And on this, can we go back to the slide with the 6 valves? These are 6 valves that I pulled out of a Continental engine. 3 of them are burnt where the engine should not be operated, and 3 are perfectly good. But look at them. It's like, wow, I have no idea what you're looking at. When you do a borescope inspection, I use this as a reference. The cameras that we have now that are readily available, low cost, are remarkable, and this is how much detail you could see. So real quickly, when you're looking at an exhaust valve, and I'm not going to try and make a mechanic out of here because we don't have time to do that, but valves rotate when the engine is running for 2 reasons: to help dissipate the heat on the face of the valve and to help clean the seat where the valve sits with the cylinder. So when you look in a cylinder and see a valve, this looks like a burnt valve. No, it's perfectly healthy. Symmetry. Symmetry is good. When you see symmetry like that circle, that means that valve is rotating and heat is being dissipated.
Before you went to that next picture, so here we've taken out a spark plug and we put a small camera through the spark plug hole inside the cylinder, and we're looking at the
Exhaust valve.
At the exhaust valve. And so we see a pattern there of burn, but this one is good because it's circular and it's
Symmetry,
symmetrical.
right.
Okay.
So two real rules to remember. Symmetry is what you're looking for. When you see irregular patterns, that's bad. And green. When the valve actually turns to green, it's failing. So let's look at some other pictures real quickly because they're all different. Here's another perfectly healthy valve, but it looks completely different. Those are lead deposits on the face of the valve. The red is unburned byproducts of combustion, just stuff in the gas that didn't burn off. That's not a burnt valve. That's a perfectly healthy valve, as is this one, which looks completely different, as is this one, which looks completely different, as is this one. Now, the difference between this valve and the next valve, that's not symmetry. So that valve, the rotation is slowed, and if the rotator cap wasn't repaired, where it will force it to rotate it again, it will burn. Here's early stages of a burn. You can see the red migrating to the center of the valve. Here's a very irregular pattern. So the two rules to remember is symmetry is bad. There's nothing symmetrical about this, and there's no green here. Yeah. This valve has green. Green means stop. If you ever see a valve where the valve itself and not the products on the face of the valve are green, that's bad. Here's another burnt valve. You can see the small crack at the 12 o'clock position. You can look underneath the valve to determine how clean the seat and the face is. You can check the honing on the cylinders. Our cylinders are honed when they're manufactured, so the cylinder retains oil to lubricate the valve. A borescope inspection is really the gold standard for determining the health of that cylinder.
Indeed, and that's where we put a camera inside the cylinder to look at the face of the valves, and just from looking at the valves you can get a pretty good idea if it's a solid valve or if it's beginning to fail or if it's failed like the one that we just saw with a crack in it.
That's right.
This is amazing. So it's a much better way of determining the health of your engine by going inside the engine and looking at it rather than just doing the compression. So this is fascinating. Now, Adrian does a much longer presentation that I've heard before when he's talking just about determining the health of your engine. So he just gave you a quick snippet of what he did with the valves. Adrian's done a lot of research on this, and he's worked in conjunction with AOPA, and they put out a brochure, actually a poster.
Anatomy of an exhaust valve failure.
Anatomy of an exhaust valve failure, so that mechanics all around the U.S. could look at this poster and say, here's what I'm looking for when I'm inside the engine with a borescope, and they get a better idea. So he's been doing a good job of educating not only you and me as pilots, but mechanics as well. Well, Adrian, this is fascinating, and I think we could have gone a lot longer and a lot deeper in this, of course, because you've got a wealth of knowledge. But it's been so good to have you here with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Adrian Eichhorn from Manassas, Virginia, pilot, mechanic, adventurer, good friend. It's been good to have you with us, and we've learned a lot from you. So thank you for joining us for this first two segments of Plane Time. Stay tuned. Within 15 minutes, we'll come back with another two segments on icing. And this is kind of the bane of any pilot. What if there's anything that strikes fear in hearts of pilots? It's icing. So come back with us, and we'll have a new host and a new guest, Dr. George Bartuska, to talk about icing. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a few minutes. I'm Ron Timmermans of the Florida Aviation Network. Thank you for joining us.